I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. You were in a car crash, and you lost your head.
Grimerica.
I believe that they had become concerned that Paul McCartney, who was arguably the most popular Beatle, he and John Lennon, if he were not in the picture anymore, that they just weren't quite sure where this was going to go.
All right, so tonight we've got Mike Williams here. He's the host of Sage of Quay Radio, and he talks about all kinds of stuff that we talk about on there as well: alternative research, conspiracy, holistic healing, the esoteric. Is pretty interesting when I started looking him up, how much we have in common as far as our shows go. But we got in touch with him from the author of the memoirs of Billy Shears, You Harriet, and he told us to get a hold of Mike and talk about this book. And with us tonight, we also have our friend Mark Allard from Calgary here, who's a big fan of this, and we thought we'd bring him in with this interview for about 45 minutes here before he has to take off. So thanks for all your patience, guys, with the technical issues, and welcome to the show, Mike and Mark.
Thank you, Graham. Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's great to have you here.
I'll take credit for the technical difficulties, I guess.
Yeah, good job there, Darren, fixing them. It's so funny having
fixing them.
You probably go through this, Mike, all the time. Like, you try and do these tests and you realize something's wrong and you try and troubleshoot it, and it's like you don't even know how things change week to week in the studio.
I just had that recently with a show I did with Sophia Smallstorm. So I completely understand, guys. No worries.
Yeah, I just saw that. I saw that show on your website, actually. I felt like asking you about that. It sounds like some really interesting stuff on biological darkness.
It's always good when it comes from Sophia. She's a great researcher.
Right on. So, Mark, thanks for coming on and helping us out with this. It's an interesting topic. Darren and I were talking about it a bit today. This whole Paul McCartney fiasco and conspiracy going way back. And you've read this book, and you and I talked about the show all the time, and you're like, you got to get this guy on. And so
absolutely, I was very excited when I saw that you were actually going to do a segment on the memoirs of Billy Shear. I've read it at least 3 times, and fascinating. It is absolutely one of my favorite books. And my first question to Mike is, have you met Thomas U. Harriet?
I've never met Tom. I've had a couple of email exchanges. My first email exchange to Tom was to ask him to come on to my show to talk about the book. And he had agreed to come on the show. And then within maybe, I would say, a week, he said he couldn't do any shows. But he had listened to my show that I did with Sophia, and he had asked me if he gets any additional inquiries, would I mind talking about the book? And I said, no, I won't mind talking about it at all. And what I do, Graham and Mark, before I even get started with the show, is just to let everybody know I have nothing to do with the book. I have nothing to do with Tom U. Harriet. I have nothing to do with Bill Shepard, who's the person that plays the character of Paul McCartney. So I just like talking about it. It's just an interesting topic.
Well, so this morning, Mike, I actually listened to your podcast with Sophia, or on Sophia's cast. I loved it. And before we get into that information, which I'm sure Graham and Darren will want to explore, I would be interested to know, as someone that is fully in love with this theory and this concept, and I have to admit from the start that I'm agnostic. I really don't know enough facts to make any sort of decision. But one of the things that you had mentioned in the podcast was that you became a believer as a result of this book. Can you maybe go into some detail about that? What was it that changed your mind?
There was just too much detail, way too much detail. And the ins and outs of the songs, what was done in the studio, what happened on specific dates, conversations with the other Beatles, Lennon, George Harrison, and so on. So, as I went through the book, and I read both books. I read Billy's Back, which is the abridged version, and then that caught my interest, and I decided, let me go get the big book. So the big book is 66 chapters, 666 pages, you know this. So it's just loaded up with so much detail and information that, you know, if I put my logical hat on, you say to yourself, the only way this really could have been written is by somebody who was there. And then Hugh Harriet has this book. He published it through CreateSpace on Amazon. So that's the other thing that came into play. I thought to myself, well, why go that route? Because you're going to go through all this effort to write 666 pages. You're going to want to make sure you make some money at this, I would think.
Sure.
And, you know, and going through CreateSpace, self-publishing, you know, that's a gamble. You may make money, you may not make money, you know. So it is a bunch of variables that came into play, Mark. But I would say the biggest one was just the volume of details in the book was just, it was overwhelming.
I also started with Billy's Back, and that prompted me to buy the full abridged version as well. Immediately upon reading the full version, I tried to find Thomas Harriet. I tried to track him down. I tried to find some sort of verifiable proof that he actually existed and wasn't the creation of, you know, a good fiction writer who maybe put together a bunch of facts. I imagine that you did some due diligence yourself. So how did you come to the conclusion that this was indeed an actual person and not just, whether it's a creation of Sir Paul McCartney trying to, deify his own legend, or whether it's just a Beatles fan that compiled information through, you know, the millions of books and stuff? How did you decide that this was a legitimate person?
Yeah, well, the first thing was the email exchanges with Tom. They were very cordial, and I had no sense whatsoever that I was, you know, dealing with somebody other than the person who calls himself Tom Hugh Harriet. He's also on Facebook. So I found him on Facebook. Mm-hmm. I didn't friend him because I didn't want it to be perceived as a conflict of interest if I'm going to, you know, talk about the book. So I just let it be. Maybe that's a pun. I don't know. But in any case, I mean, just the conversations I had with Tom, and he clued me in on a couple of other things through email. That one thing is not in the book, and the other thing made it into a recent revision. He revised the book in October of 2016, last month. And those two things were, he talked to me about in the email about Shepard was also Phil Ackrell of the Diplomats. Of course, that was the band that Denny Lane was in. That originally, it was in the book, but it was very coy the way it was presented. And then I had emailed Tom and I said, look, I'm reading the book, and this whole piece on Phil Ackrell, you can go both ways. He was or he wasn't. What's the deal there? And he wrote back to me and said, Mike, you interpreted it the exact way it was to be interpreted. So it was a coyness that was going on in the book. But then he said the clue is in the song Rock Show that McCartney or Bill Shepard did from the Wings Over America and Venus and Mars. I think it was Venus and Mars it was on. So it's the lyric there that said, Silly Willie from the Philly band could be ooh-wee. So Silly Willie was Bill Shepard, Willie, Bill, from the Philly band, Phil Ackrell, and the band, of course, being the Diplomats, could be ooh-wee. So he actually has now put that into the book to expand that whole section on Phil Ackrell. The other thing that he told me that is not in the book is that along with the surgeries and the fillers that are discussed in the book to explain the transformation of going from Bill Shepard to Vivian Stanshall to Paul McCartney, that there was latex used also. He didn't get into great detail with the latex, but I'm assuming it had to do more with the character of Vivian Stanshall. I had those types of conversations, and, you know, so I don't have any reason to believe that he's other than who he says he is. Could he be somebody else? I guess, but based upon my communications with him, I think he's Tom Hugh Harriet.
I'm only one friend generation away from Tom Hugh Harriet.
Really?
I was just on his Facebook page, and if I go to his friends, he has friends. He has a friend that I have mutual friends with.
Wow!
Look at that.
Nice. So one of the reasons, Mike, that I'm so agnostic on this subject is because the Beatles themselves have completely endorsed this idea that Paul is dead, from things like showing Paul's crashed car in the Freeze a Bird video, and even in the memoirs of Billy Shears, it's suggested that Neil Aspinall was the driving force behind the marketing of this idea on a consumerism level, which doesn't mean that it didn't actually happen, which is what makes this such an intriguing idea. What involvement do you think the Beatles themselves and the people within Apple Corp, how much knowledge do you think that they had, and how much do you think that they participated in, like, spreading this rumor?
Yeah, that's what Darren was wondering about too.
Well, I think the first thing we have to understand is the Beatles are a Tavistock project. That's the first thing that we have to understand. And so Tavistock, of course, is into mind control, social engineering, and you guys are probably well aware what the stuff that Tavistock's involved in.
Yeah, absolutely.
EMI also has, and it's even mentioned in the book that EMI has direct connections into British intelligence. And in the book, Shepard states that he worked with the CIA and British intelligence via the MK Ultra program in the 1960s to promote LSD, specifically at the Monterey International Pop Festival, which is where Jimi Hendrix played. So that's the piece of it that we have to get our heads wrapped around, that once you've got Tavistock involved, I think that all bets are on. He talks extensively about his Masonic influences, his stature in Freemasonry. So we have this whole secret society theme running through this. So you factor in the Masons, Tavistock, EMI, the CIA, British intelligence, and the Beatles were not what they were presented as. Plain and simple. I know a lot of people are not going to want to hear that, but that's the realization I had to come to, Mark, because I didn't want to believe that. I'm a huge Beatle freak. I'm a guitar player and a musician, and they are the reason why I picked up a guitar and started to play. And so when I started to come around on this thing, and I could go into denial. That's what I was saying to myself, or I can keep reading the book and see where it takes me. And by the time I finished the book, I just said, well, it is what it is.
Yeah. I think this is such a wonderful way to begin this interview, because it really whets the appetite for the listeners to get more of a general context before we dive into the actual information. So another question that I had for you was, as a researcher and as somebody who has exposed themselves to a lot of information, do you feel that you or someone in your position would be able to, because certainly Tavistock, MK Ultra, CIA, you throw in all of these elements that are very attractive of a certain time period, and without necessarily saying attractive in a positive sense, but we're compelled by these things like MK Ultra and mind control and Tavistock Institute and the Beatles. Would you be able to take a bunch of assorted information from a certain time period and create a work of fiction? Like, for instance, when I was in high school, I read a book called Candle in the Wind, which was a fictional account of the 5 days leading to Marilyn Monroe's death. And there was a disclaimer at the start that said this was fiction, but you could read it and believe it was true. So would you be able to do that with information? And what makes you convinced that the memoirs of Billy Shears is not? I mean, I keep coming back to the same thing. I apologize if I'm repeating myself.
No, you're not repeating yourself. No, he calls it historical fiction.
Yeah.
Right from the onset. So, and the reason why he does that is because he's under confidentiality agreements, non-disclosures. He's got a lot at stake here. This man has made a gazillion dollars over the years, and he's in no position to give that up. And he explains in the book that one of the big reasons is because all this wealth is going to go to his children. So, I mean, he's in a mode here where he's protecting everything he's done in the last 50 years and beyond, right? Because he's going to, like I said, his kids are going to benefit from everything he's done and all of his wealth. So, but to answer your question, Mark, could somebody pull this together and create fiction and make it appear to be nonfiction? Yeah, of course, somebody could do that. But that's the point I made in the beginning. For somebody to sit down, this had to take an enormous amount of time to write 666 pages. And
the fact that it's coded.
And it's right, and it's encoded. It's encoded, exactly. Yeah. So that was the point I was making earlier. Maybe we can expand on that a little bit. You're going to go into all of this effort. You're going to write a book that's 666 pages. You're going to encode it, and then you're going to sell it through CreateSpace. How does that work?
Yeah.
Right? So,
yeah, right. Totally. Yeah.
So I think that this is very much in line with a lot of stuff that Bill Shepard has done in the past, where he has kind of slipped things under the radar. He likes to do that. He likes to have that little tongue-in-cheek, that little nod and wink, right? The release of the album, The Fireman, when he released his album, Thrillington, right? All of these types of things. And there's many times when Shepard, as McCartney, has played on other albums. He's participated in the recordings and whatnot. And he did not put his name on any credits, and he didn't take any credit, and he just let it go at that. So I think that, to be honest with you, I kind of settled in with knowing some of the other stuff that McCartney had done over the years where he didn't stamp his name on it. I don't know. This kind of falls to that kind of theme, I think.
That's a great point. I mean, it really does seem absurd that someone would go through all that effort and not try to make any money off of, why not go to a publisher? Well, because I at least get the impression that it was written by someone that really wasn't doing it for the money. More of that fireman, let's pass this under the rug.
Well, and it's the same thing as the clues on the albums, right? They're just kind of slipping it out there and to see who picks up on it, right? So this, to me, is in the mode of what had been done in the past by Bill Shepard, both as a Beatle and in his post-Beatle career.
Do you think it's possible that You Harriet is another alias then for Shepard?
I thought about that.
And that you've been corresponding with,
I thought about that. I did. I thought to myself.
Because again, I've read it like 3-4 times, and I was reading a little bit today. I mean, it's a brilliant book in that you can literally pick it up in any chapter, and it is compelling. You don't necessarily have to start from the beginning to be drawn into it. So having read it a few times, and when I do, I constantly think about these different scenarios, because tracking down You Harriet, it's almost impossible. I don't know if I've ever seen a picture of him. Interestingly, he does have other books out, and they're all spiritual books about Zen, and which I found quite interesting. Were you aware of that? Of his other books?
I saw some of his other books, and the other thing with You Harriet that is important to understand is that he has a Bachelor of Arts degree in English from Brigham Young University. So he is a Mormon, and the Masons are completely tied in to the Mormon religion. And I mentioned this in the interview with Sophia, and in my exchanges with Tom. I mean, he never wrote back to me and said, Mike, I take issue with you saying I'm a Freemason. So that was never discussed. So I'm going to make an assumption here, because I've done a lot of research into secret societies and the Masons and so on, and Jesuits, that we're dealing with a person who is a Freemason. And Bill Shepard is a very, very high level Freemason. Now, Masons are only going to work with Masons.
Yeah.
Shepard is not going to connect with anybody to do this. So, he connected with somebody that is in the Brotherhood, and they work together to pull this book together.
As a musician and as a Beatles fan, were you at all surprised by the references in the book to other artists who were aware of McCartney's death and proceeded to write songs about it? Because that is something that really grabbed me. I was just in shock over some of those references in other people's songs.
I was very surprised by that, because one of the reasons why I wasn't a believer in his whole Paul is dead thing was I would think to myself, how could it be that nobody has said anything? How could this have been suppressed? Other band members, other bands, friends, engineers, producers, you just go right down the line. How could that be? Well, in the book, he talks about Donovan knew, the Stones knew, the Who knew, Elton John knows. So the thing is, they're all in this game. They're all in it.
Yeah.
Right? So these are all creations. Now, it's not to say that they don't write great music, and it's not to say that they're not creative and great songwriters, but they're all in the same club. And they all got to where they got as far as their fame and fortune because they're in this system. They're in this system of secret societies, Freemasonry. And look, Mark, you read the book. So Bill Shepard gets into the whole satanic aspect of this, Satanism.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's a dark underbelly of this. And
oh, yeah, the whole Crowley thing. Yeah.
Right. And so all of these bands, they're all in on this because they're all doing the same thing. They're all tied into the same people, the same organizations, and they're going through the same process. And so once I understood that, that answered my question as to why these other bands never said a word.
Do you think there's any connection to Dave McGowan's work and like the hippie movement and that subculture that came up in the late 60s? A lot, you know, he was talking about how that was all some sort of, you know, like all those family members, all those guys, like Jim Morrison's dad was a big military figurehead, and there was he was an admiral, I think.
The list was long.
Yeah,
right?
he goes through it. I mean, you can listen to it. Yeah, exactly. He goes through like all these bands were possibly, you know, could have all been a thing, and they all came out of Laurel Canyon all around the same time.
To me, it's the same thing. It's the same thing. Again, it doesn't take away, in my view, from the fact that many of these musicians in these bands are very talented. In fact, many of them may have even been unaware of how tied into a program that they were, because you know, these programs are run through managers, handlers, and so on. As an example, the Beatles were, you know, their recording company was EMI. Well, EMI was directly tied into British intelligence. I think that's what happens in many of these bands. The band members are not aware. That's my personal view. Now, some of them could be, but I think the vast majority of them are not aware. And so then what happens is the process of steering them starts to take place.
Right.
And some of them pan out and some of them do not pan out. I mean, Zappa out of Laurel Canyon also, and I have a hard time believing that Frank Zappa was going along with the program. He was probably, in my view, one of the largest anti-establishment performers and musicians we had out there. So he may have been one of those guys that they were trying to steer, but they finally gave up. You know, they just couldn't do anything with Frank.
Well, it makes you wonder, too, that these bands couldn't get that popular back then if they didn't get the play, right? Like, obviously, you know, I didn't really sort of buy into all this stuff until a few years ago when I started realizing how much control the media has on who it plays and how much they play it. And you know, it does seem to be like probably less so now because of social media and the way we, you know, there's so many more bands out there and you can listen to them without listening to the radio. But I mean, back then, like that's how everybody found out about these bands, right?
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. I remember back in those days, payola, you couldn't go on the radio unless money was exchanged. You know, that goes back all the way back to the 1950s, right? So today, it's, I think, a lot easier to dig into this stuff and research it. Back then, we didn't have an internet. so it was a lot more difficult to figure it out.
So what's the purpose then of like the big picture purpose of them covering up Paul McCartney's death and replacing him with somebody else? I mean, obviously there's the, you know, you want to keep that ball rolling, like keep the Beatles going, I guess. But why is it a pop culture experiment, or is it as a distraction for people? Like what's the intention behind it?
Well, I think the intention is that there was so much money involved with the Beatles. The Beatles were cranking a lot of cash, and I believe that they had become concerned that Paul McCartney, who was arguably the most popular Beatle, he and John Lennon, if he were not in the picture anymore, that they just weren't quite sure where this was going to go. So the Beatles could have ended in September of 1966. Now, the other piece of this says to me, though, that I'm not so sure I quite believe that story, although I think it has some credibility. I believe that Tavistock wanted to see whether they could hide a major league, well-known artist in plain sight. And what would the public reaction be to that? Would the public figure it out?
Yeah,
So
that's the
that's what I
experiment
think.
part of it. Yeah.
It was an experiment, right? So that's what I think it was. I think they said, hey, you know what? This is perfect. Let's see what happens. Let's see if they pick up on the fact that this guy is not Paul McCartney. And in one of the shows, it was either Sophia or I did a show with Mark Devlin also, that was a big, big win, in my view, for Tavistock. Huge, huge win, because they had to sit there probably in amazement and say to themselves, this is unbelievable. Nobody, well, virtually nobody, has picked up on this. And even when we put the clues out there, nobody cares. You know? So here we have this very high-profile musician, entertainer. He's not the guy that everybody believes he is. We're watching an impersonator, and nobody knows, nobody cares. So I think that from a Tavistock perspective was a big check mark for them.
A lot of Beatles fans. Oh, sir, go ahead.
What would be like the top, if someone hasn't looked into it, what are would you say are the top 10 clues?
The top 10 clues would be, well, their record albums. So you can start with Sgt. Pepper. Although it goes before Sgt. Pepper. If you take a look at the Beatles Yesterday and Today album cover, where Paul is sitting in there's like a chest there, big suitcase chest, and he's sitting inside of it. That was one clue. But Pepper was loaded up with clues. And in the book, I believe it was chapter 11, I don't have it in front of me, Shepard goes into great, great detail about everything that was included on the Pepper album, all Masonic, all mysticism, all esoteric. And he also makes the claim that Peter Blake got credit for doing the Sgt. Pepper album cover, but he said that was just to attribute the album cover to. He said he was behind the creation of Sgt. Pepper, the entire album, soup to nuts, including the album cover. He was in charge from the day that he showed up. But the album covers, you have all of the backmasking, and then one of the other album covers that people would point to all the time is Abbey Road, them crossing the street, also Magical Mystery Tour. The pictures of Paul McCartney, I put something up on Facebook about 2 weeks ago, guys, where I had pulled a bunch of pictures of McCartney from, I started with 1964 and 65 when it was the biological Paul, and then I went through time, and it was 2 PowerPoint slides, and I just put the pictures right next to each other going through time. It's not the same person. It's not the same person. I had a number of people comment on it on my Facebook page, and they said, you know, Mike, when you look at it like this, when you have it right in front of your face, this comparison, it's obvious that this guy is not this guy. So I would tell
the earlobes
folks,
thing, yeah.
Oh, his
sorry, go ahead.
earlobes. Yeah, no, I was going to say,
that for me, that was one of the biggest ones. Is you don't go from attached earlobes to detached. Yeah, and the height. You know, those are things that aren't. You know, I have time just for one more question, Mike, before I go, and I'll leave you with Graham and Darren. But I was curious, for this book now has been out first edition since 2009. Why do you think it's not more talked about, this book? And when do you think that it might be? When Shepard dies? When do you think this book will become more?
That's a good question. And that's another reason why I think that the book is legit, because it's out there. And like I said, he's going through Create Space. And he's also selling the book on his, You Harriet is, on his website.
Yeah.
But I don't think that they care. I don't think that they mind that it's a slow drip. I really don't. I mean, what does Shepard have to lose? He's got, like I said before, $1 gazillion. I'm sure that Harriet was paid very, very well to participate in the writing of the book. It's like everything else. Here's another clue for you all. The walrus is Paul. Yeah. Well, right. So that's what I think is going on. And in the book, he does state, though, that when he does pass away, that there's going to be a lot more information coming out. And I was thinking to myself, okay, I don't know what a lot more means. He's got 666 pages of stuff that blew my mind, but he's saying that he's got more coming, and so we'll just have to see.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Mike, for the opportunity to ask you questions. And I know Darren and Graham are anxious to jump in and dive into more of the content of the book. But I really wanted to just be able to ask you, the philosophical questions from one reader to another, from one researcher to another, about what made this credible for you and what your experience was. So have a great evening and a great chat with Darren and Graham. Thank you, Darren and Graham, for inviting me on. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
And and I'll let you guys continue. I have a class to go to.
All right, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Mark.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Mark.
Mark.
All right.
Bye now.
Take care.
Now we're going to have to wade back into the shallow end of the pool.
He had some great questions, by the way.
Yeah, no, that's good. Yeah, I just
Very
felt
good.
like we like to try and get people involved when they're super interested in our guests and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, I keep coming back to the intention and the experiments and why the intelligence communities or whatever you want to call them are sort of getting involved in all this stuff. But I mean, if you think about that experiment you were talking about, like, will people notice? And if we didn't notice, I'm not sure how long it took for people to start getting wind of this possibly being a conspiracy and when it sort of started to open up. But I mean, you could see these Tavistocs and these intelligence agencies, jumping on that and going, okay, well, they're not noticing this kind of stuff. We can take it to the next level. And then, I mean, when you get to the 80s and the 90s with the music scene and all that, who knows what kind of involvement there is.
Yeah, well, they were very surprised that they were dropping the clues, and the clues were there since Sgt. Pepper. And it wasn't until 1969 that it caught the public's attention.
3 years after.
Yeah, 2 or 3 years later. And that was because they had fed the clues to a guy by the name of Fred Labor. And Fred, I guess, was in college at the time, and it wound up making a Missouri newspaper. And that kind of got the ball going. So they were clearly looking for this to get some legs. And of course, my theory is it's because they wanted to see what would happen. If it did break, and let's just say that he got called out and they figured out that he wasn't Paul McCartney, that he's Bill Shepard, then what would have happened? Would people just shrug their shoulders and say, wow, that's interesting. I still like the music, carry on. Mm-hmm. So, so in my view, Tavistock didn't have a whole lot to lose in this whole thing. Shepard himself was instrumental. He wasn't just a body that they picked out. This is a guy that was nurtured from, very, very early on in his life. In the book, he states that, he comes from a Masonic family, that his uncle was a very high-ranking Mason. His uncle was the one that made the call to George Martin, to tell George Martin, that's the new guy. Make sure he suits up. And by the time that George Martin got around to letting Brian Epstein know, Epstein had already known. So that calls into question whether the whole Paul is dead, Paul dying was an accident or not.
Yeah, I was just going to get into that. Yeah.
That calls that into play. And that's a legitimate question for people to ask.
They killed Paul?
Yeah,
well,
possibly.
The Masons are involved in what's referred to as rituals. Paul McCartney, biological Paul, could have been in the pipeline from the very beginning as a ritual death, as part of their Masonic, how do I say this? They do these rituals in order to bring more power, in order to make something more powerful. Now, the other option is, and I don't rule this out, is that perhaps Paul didn't die. Maybe it was a metaphorical death. Maybe he was replaced, and then just rode into the sunset. That's the other thing I think we have to keep in the back of our minds. So, so this whole thing is very, in a lot of ways, it's very fluid.
Now, wasn't there some pretty strange stuff as well between the two of them? Like, didn't Billy Shepard have dreams or some sort of premonition?
Paul had dreams.
Oh, it was Paul that had them. Yeah.
Yeah, he was having premonitions of his death. And he was having these nightmares, and he would talk to the other band members. He would talk to John and George and Ringo about these dreams that he was having, and they would kind of scoff it off, and they didn't take it very seriously. He was also, according to the book, he was making plans in preparation of his departure or his death, which I thought was kind of interesting because at that point, what was he, 23 years old? He was 24 when he died, so let's just say he was 23. What 23-year-old person starts making plans and preparations for when they're not here anymore, dying? I mean, it just didn't seem, I don't know. It doesn't seem natural. It's not natural. So there was just something, in my view, Graham, that I think this was planned out. And I think it was in the works for a very long time. In fact, in the book, Shepard says that his uncle had brought him along from an early age, ensuring that he had the proper training and skills and experience so that he was ready when this point in time was reached. So, what does that mean? I don't know whether that means when Paul McCartney died or some other opportunity arose where he would be able to step in. So that was a very, very, like I said, very interesting part of the book that he talks about.
Wonder if they would have had replacements for all the Beatles then?
Well, he said that Shepard said that Lennon was starting to get very paranoid. So when Shepard had shown up and they were recording Sgt. Pepper, John started to wonder, well, could I be replaced? In other words, not that he would die, but if they decided that they didn't want him around anymore or, his shelf life was up, could they bring somebody else in? And there we go. Now we have a new John Lennon. So in the book, he talks about the fact that Lennon was paranoid about that.
Oh, man, that's fascinating.
I mean, the funny comparison is, just from like a mundane point of view is, you see a lot of band member switcheroos nowadays.
Right.
And it's just kind of, nobody really cares too much. But back then, you could be worried about losing your audience, and you'd think like it could just be in the 60s, it wouldn't be that hard to trick people, right? Just stay away from the cameras for a year or two. Don't get too close to the groupies. None of them have seen you up close before, for the most part. Yeah. What about his family?
Shepard's family? Well,
did biological Paul have any?
Biological Paul. Look, this is going to be an assumption on my part, but I don't think I'm going to be wrong. I believe his father was a very high-ranking Freemason, James McCartney. And because what happened was when Shepard was introduced to the family, in fact, he was, let me just talk to you guys about something here. You'll kind of get the point. It'd be a lot easier for me to do it this way. So let me just take you through some dates, and this will kind of fill in the blanks.
Yeah, thanks.
So McCartney dies, right, on September 11th, Sunday, 1966, decapitated. And it was a lady passenger. Her name was Donna. So he had picked up a hitchhiker. The bodies were pronounced dead after midnight on Monday, September 12th. But evidently they're using the September 11th, 1966 date, 9/11, as the date of death, right? Because he was the car accident was horrific, according to the book and other accounts. Brian Epstein meets Bill Shepard on September 12th and brings him on board. So Shepard was known as Billy Pepper, and he was recording Mercy Beat albums, which included Beatle cover songs. And those albums were called Billy Pepper and the Pepper Pot. So here we have McCartney dying on September 11th, late at night. They pronounce him dead on September 12th. Epstein meets Bill Shepard on September 12th, like he just appears from nowhere. Brian Epstein sends Lennon a telegram. Lennon was in Paris at the time. That was on Tuesday, September 13th. Then Brian Epstein introduces Shepard to John on Friday, September 16th. This was 5 days after Paul had died, and that meeting took place in Paris, France. So when you look at those dates and you step through it, the first question you have to ask yourself is, well, they just didn't pluck him out of a line. He was in the pipeline. Shepard was in the pipeline. Mm-hmm. So in order for Shepard to be in the pipeline, in my view, I think that the whole thing was masterminded by these Freemasons, and I believe Jim McCartney, biological Paul's dad, was in on it because they had introduced Shepard to the McCartney family. I think it was the 12th. I think it was on September 12th, and they had a big kumbaya. And the way it's told in the book is that the McCartney family was game for this, and they were good to go because it would carry on their son's legacy. And he says in the book that they were offering Bill some of Paul's clothes and stuff like this, which of course didn't fit because biological Paul was shorter, a smaller guy than Shepard. Shepard is a pretty tall guy. And so he's going through all this. And so the first thing I thought to myself, guys, when I was reading this was, well, what family who has their son pass away just hours before has some stranger sitting in their living room talking about replacing him in a band? I mean, I would think that as a family, you'd be thinking to yourself, I don't care about the band. My son was just killed in an auto accident, and you guys want to talk about whether this guy can fill in for him? Mm-hmm. I mean, would you please go away? But that didn't happen. So, it's weird. It's really weird. The whole thing is very creepy, in fact. So I think that's, like I said, based upon the book and the chronology that a Shepard is taking us through, that, they were all in on it.
Yeah, plus it is a little more suspect than I thought, too, picking up the hitchhiker and then, decapitation. Like, come on. I don't know. It sounds a bit too convenient.
Yeah, and the song Lady Madonna is Lady McCartney Donna, the girl in the car. So when you listen to the song, Lady McDonna, take a look at the lyrics. I'm sure you guys have listened to them, right? He lays all the dates out. He lays the dates out of what transpired. The chronology is in the song.
Yeah, it's so crazy, the symbolism. Like, do you follow some of the new conspiracies over Illuminati symbolism in some of our current famous pop stars?
Yeah.
So you think there is something? I mean, obviously, it's part of the same thing, really.
It is the same thing, and that's the other thing that I tell folks is that nothing has changed. It's just gotten more. It's more in our face now. And I think that that's by design. I think it's because they want to make it pop culture so that it makes it less scary. It makes it less ominous, if you will. So if you've got them walking around covering their eye, making triangles, with their hands and so on, then, people are going to think that that's cool.
Isn't there something else about that as well? Like almost, I don't even know how to describe it. Something occult, like putting it out there is almost giving yourself you could almost say you told them so in some weird symbolistic way, so you kind of free yourself from the karma that lying about that stuff would bring. That's almost one of the reasons why they put it out there, so that they can metaphysically say, oh well, we told people, or we put it out there. We're not hiding it because it's out there in symbolism, so we're free from the bonds.
Yeah, I've heard that, that it frees them from bad karma, if you will. I'm not sure that I buy into that, because it's still deception. You're still deceiving. Even though you're putting it out there in a very, very deceptive way. And you're putting it out there deceptively. And that because you're doing it that way, that the vast majority of the folks are not going to get it. Because they're ignorant to your symbolism and your sigils and all that stuff. So that's the thing. When people bring that up about the karma aspect of it, I understand the premise, but I don't agree with it.
So you think it's more of a metaphysical gain of power then through the symbolism?
Power. Yep. By flashing those symbols and their sigils, it's power. That's what I think it is. That's what I had mentioned before about when I talked about the killing of Paul McCartney. If he did die, let's say he wasn't replaced and he rode into the sunset, that he actually physically died, and it was a Masonic blood ritual, that's power. Blood is very, very important in their rituals. Blood sacrifices is very, very important. So I think...
keep going.
No, good. I'm good.
Well, I wonder about, we get into this every once in a while, the Illuminati and the power brokers of the world. And how do you connect, or do you try and reconcile this yourself? Like the people responsible for this kind of thing and how that connects to, I don't know, whether it's our, the banksters, or whether it's, the Bilderbergs or the Trilateral Commission, or is it even beyond them? Or like, how do you... What's your feeling on like who this is, and are these players international or American, or you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's worldwide. we have worldwide controllers. We don't have geographic controllers. I mean, they have their geographic minions.
Right.
They masquerade as politicians and so on. But it's international. It's global. It's so it goes up through the secret societies, and it all ends up at the end of the day back into the Vatican with the Jesuits. So
that's
this is all
what I was getting at.
Yeah, it's all controlled. Everything is controlled. In fact, Ole Damagard is a very good friend of mine, and on one show I had said to Ole that everything worth knowing is a lie. I mean, just pick something, and once you start digging into it and you get into that rabbit hole, you're going to find that what you were told, what you were taught, was not the truth.
Right. So this goes back thousands of years, then, right? The Vatican, the Jesuits. This is back to how far back? Like Egyptian mystery school type stuff, or?
Oh yeah, back to the Egyptian mystery schools. Definitely back into Babylon. Yeah, it goes way, way back. Today they have the means, they have the technology available to them to be able to sway the minds and the beliefs and the values of people easier. Back in the old days, I mean, you basically had to kill people, right? You had to cause all kinds of pain, and you had a war and all that good stuff in order to get people to get them under your thumb. But now the technology is such that they're able to do all of this mind shaping and conditioning, all of this mind control, this programming, by people watching a television set, listening to the radio, reading the newspaper, reading magazines, listening to music, and so on. So this is how they do it now. It's not this invasive approach that existed, even 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Today, it's they could just blast it out, and people are more than happy to sit in front of their TV sets.
Well, and plus there's
programmed.
Plus, there's the meds and the fluoride, and I mean all the other stuff that, the sugar, whatever else they've made it easy for us to.
Well, think how easy it would be to just be slowly editing the internet, especially when some sort of content control comes into place, or
that's what I was
truth verification.
Do you think, I was just going to ask him that? I mean, is the internet the wild card here, though, and that there's a chance that this is going to blow up in their face, or is that just the next control mechanism?
I believe that it could blow up in their face. I don't think that everything that they do is perfect, and they do make mistakes. Now, the thing is that they're able to recover from their mistakes because they control everything, or they like to believe that they control everything. But people are awakening to the fact that they're being lied to and that there's deception. And so I think it's going to be more difficult for the controllers to be able to move at the rate and pace that they are accustomed to. Whether they get to their end state, that's going to depend on the rate and pace of people waking up, in my view. But, I mean, let's face it, though. I'm a realist about this. They have a lot of tools in their tool bag, a lot more than we do, for sure. And they've been doing it a very, very long time. And they're utilizing mysticism, black magic, sorcery, the esoteric, all of this stuff. I mean, at the very top, these people are adepts. And we are the profane. Even people who think they know a lot about this stuff, researchers that get into the rabbit hole and they expose this and expose that.
Yeah.
Tip of the iceberg.
Yeah.
Tip of the iceberg.
And you realize that so much of it is disinformation as well. It's so hard to parse away the truth from the disinformation.
Yep.
So, Darren, what you think that this is that they're going to be able to just edit the internet, and that's going to be the easiest way for them to.
Eventually, like right now, it's pretty easy for schmucks like us to make websites. And you can still get quite a bit of reach. But I could see, maybe not in our lifetime, but I could see, a generation from now. You can't just do it, right? Or everyone notices, and then you have problems.
Because even on Twitter,
you slowly tweak it over a generation, right? You wait till we're a little older, and you start tightening it up, and then we're like, oh, but the kids are like, well, they're just kind of crazy.
Yeah, and
then the next generation, you reel it back again, and then all of a sudden, Google's the only search engine,
and they only worry about people that are way too close to the real truth. So if you're out there and you think you found something and you're putting it up on websites and blogs, or you're doing YouTube documentaries, in most cases, you're not anywhere near where the alarm bells would go off of them. That's the other thing. So there's degrees of how close you get to the truth with regard to these controllers, these puppet masters.
Have you made it close?
Me personally?
Yeah.
No, I don't think so. I have a lot of interesting guests, and we talk about a lot of very, very interesting topics, like MK Ultra and the show I just had with Sophia about the biological darkness with the sepsis agenda and stuff like that. And but even if they listen to that, they would say, well, those are two people that get it. Okay, but that's two people.
Yeah.
And Mike's got 4,300 subscribers, so we're not going to worry about him.
Yeah. What's the deal with the biological darkness and the sepsis? I find it just fascinating just reading the summary there.
Well, they're just breaking down our mind-body dynamic, and they're doing this by keeping us from the real sunlight, which brings health benefits to us. Vitamin D revitalizes our body, and and everything is artificial light. Everything is has to do with the whole process of the pharmaceutical business, the GMOs, the vaccines, the flu shots, the fluoride, the aspartame, the chemtrails,
the sugar,
everything. This is to break us down, and that's the sepsis cycle, and to keep us constantly with disease and illness best they can. And it's a very, very evil, very twisted agenda. You guys know. I mean, I saw your website, Graham, so I know that you guys are getting into this stuff too.
Yeah. It's just fascinating because I've been into this sort of biohacking stuff lately as well, and I hear all this stuff about how good sunlight is for us now, and it doesn't even really cause cancer. It's more of
the sun is biohacking now. The sun getting sunlight is biohacking.
Yeah, they're talking to all these guys that are super healthy doctors and stuff, and they're into this, and their priority is to get outside in the sun first thing in the morning and get that light and get that air. And, and we talk about it through the winter. Like, we go from indoors and it's dark and we go into fluorescent lighting all day long, and we get back and our melatonin is suppressed. Like our melatonin manufacturing, what do you call it? Yeah. You know what I mean? It's suppressed. We can't sleep properly. Then that causes other things. And then, it is nonstop. And I'm just starting to get really interested in all this stuff, and it seems to keep coming up, how important healthy water and healthy sun and breathing, and it's interesting.
Well, one of the things we talked about, Sophia and I, is that moonlight is a septic cycle. There's sepsis in the moonlight. Sunlight during the day is antiseptic. So what they're doing, when you think about it, is, and we discussed this, is they are prolonging the sepsis cycle, the septic cycle of nighttime and moonlight with the chemtrails. So they're blocking the real healthy stuff. And so we have a disproportionate amount of septic light in our lives. And this is to generate disease, and it's to generate illness and to keep you unhealthy. When you think about the magnitude of what it is that these lunatics are doing, unfortunately, they have their hands in everything. It's so wide-ranging that it's mind-boggling. And like I say all the time, it's an anti-humanity agenda, plain and simple. I mean, I don't know how anybody else, could look at it any other way.
Yeah. So what's resonating with your listeners right now as far as your show goes? Like, do you have any sort of favorite themes or stuff that you're on top of right now?
Some of the spiritual stuff, getting into artificial intelligence. I did a show recently with Christopher Gardner on the noosphere, which is the ether, and what's contained in the ether, and basically that human beings are designed to be so much more than what we are relegated to. And many times we relegate ourselves to, because we believe the lies and we believe the deceptions and the authority, So I think that that's a piece that resonates with a lot of people. I'm also a hypnotherapist, so I do a lot of past life regressions and take people back into past lives. So if you believe in reincarnation, I find people to be fascinated with that topic too, about being able to experience a past life. So those types of topics. I love those themes anyway, more so than some other stuff. But I try to cover all bases as much as I can.
Yeah, it's super interesting how I was going to ask you about that, how spirituality seems to cross over into all this stuff. Like as soon as you start getting into alternative research and history and conspiracies even a little bit or whatever, it seems like spirituality overlaps. You know, those people are sort of working on themselves or they're you know, not stuck in front of the TV, but they're meditating or doing yoga or something. Like, there's some sort of openness or overlap that happens. It's super interesting to me.
Well, yeah. Well, lack of spirituality is the reason why we're in big trouble, because it's a disconnect from the Creator, from your divine aspect. So, to the degree that we get back our connection, we're going to see a better world. I mean, this is what I believe, and this is what I explain to folks. This is why there is an anti-God, an atheist agenda in place. I mean, science today is all about there is no God. It's all everything happened because of a big bang. It was chaos, and then there was order, right, which is Masonic in itself. Mm-hmm. The whole discussion about evolution and Darwinism and all that stuff. And that's all there. It's all out there to make people believe that you came from a monkey. And you're not really any smarter than when you were a monkey. Yeah. And this is what they want people to believe. And they want to keep people in a box. And they don't want you questioning anything. It's like what George Carlin said, right? They want you smart enough just to work the machines. They don't want critical thinkers and free thinkers. Yeah. That's none of that.
Well, yeah, it's interesting how the Freemasons themselves, like they're part of their whole thing is that you have to believe in a higher power, or like the architect of the great architect. Like I'm pretty sure that it's not dogmatic, but or this is at least on the surface, that you just have to have some sort of higher power belief. Yeah, which is interesting, and yet then we're stuck in this materialistic paradigm where, like you said, that it's the atheist agenda is really driving things right now.
It is, and it's been driving it for a very long time. And if you just take a step back, just take a look at what you're being taught. I mean, where is source? Where is the Creator in all of this? Even the religions. I mean, the religions are nothing more than mechanisms to control spirituality. Exactly. That's all it is, right? Right. Yeah. So everything is in place to keep us in a box.
Have you seen good evidence of healing through your hypnotherapy sessions with people?
Oh, sure.
Like people that what is it? Is it the premise, like once you sort of acknowledge some of your past life stuff, the healing sort of begins?
It's an awareness. What happens is once your inner mind becomes aware of a change that you want to make. Now, the key to it is you have to stay dedicated to wanting to make that change. You have to have intention. So you just can't come into a session and then just not make any changes and just hop right back into the frying pan. Right. Because I have clients that come to me and they say, oh, I have so much stress, Mike. You have to help me with stress relief. So I'll work with them to bring stress relief, and they feel very, very good when they leave the sessions, and they will feel very good for, weeks, and as long as they continue to stay with the regimen. But the thing is, you come in for a hypnosis session, I'm working with you an hour at a time, but you're still being inundated with all of the external factors in your real life stuff. So if you're looking to have stress relief, yet every single day you're banging into stuff that's going to raise your stress levels and, shoot it up through the roof, that's going to be a little self-defeating. So what happens is you have to have a really a holistic view of where you want to be with your life, what kind of life you want to have. And that takes work. It does. It takes work. And that's the thing that I find that a lot of people, they want a silver bullet, Graham. They want me to bang them on the head with a magic wand and everything's going to be better, forever after you leave my office, after being with me for an hour, or if you have a couple of sessions, 2 or 3 hours. And I always explain to my clients now, you have a job, you have a piece of this responsibility yourself. In fact, you have virtually all the responsibility. You have to make commitments to yourself to want to really change. And that's going to mean that you have to make better decisions, different decisions, better choices. And but I work with my clients on that. I love my clients. I really do. I love helping people and bringing them in and seeing if I can get them, feeling better and having a better outlook in life and so on. But it takes work. It does. It takes work.
Yeah, no, we find that topic interesting as well, and it's just, you know, there's so much anecdotal evidence of that helping people. It's just annoying how it's still just, you know, ignored by the scientific community for the most part. I mean, I know there's people doing studies out there. There's lots of NDE and, you know, OBE and past life research, but they just sweep it under the rug. They ignore it.
Well, it's just like everything else. They don't want you to know that. They don't want you to know that. So you have to stay in the dark on that stuff. I've been a practicing regressionist hypnotherapist for 6 years. And I've had many, many clients, and I've done many, many past life regressions. And, you know, these things, there's a process when you die. It's not happenstance. It's not, you're not hallucinating like they want to tell folks who have NDEs. Oh, you're just hallucinating. The brain is lacking oxygen, so you're hallucinating. Well, how does everybody have the same hallucination then?
Yeah, exactly.
You know? So, but, yeah, it's very interesting. So this was a good Paul is Dead show.
yeah. No, I really wanted to talk to you about some other stuff too, because it's we've had some other alternative media on the show lately, and it's great to, you know, I always end up following you guys later, you know, when it's just good to talk to other people that are doing their own media and talking about current events without all the propaganda of the mainstream. And do you have advertising at all on your show?
No. The only thing I have, the only way I make any kind of money, and it's not a lot, trust me, is I'm a musician, and I had an album I released back in February of 2013. I'm working on my second album now. And when I tack my songs on to the end of my shows, I pick up a couple of cents each show.
Leaving Dystopia, it was called, eh?
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. What kind of music is it?
It's rock, and it's very Bill Shepard oriented.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
It's very Beatles oriented. So,
can I use your music on this episode?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, we'll throw it in the bumper music that we put in there. Well, it looks like you got a lot of good videos and stuff on your channel as well there.
I try to put quality stuff up. I really do. I spend a lot of time, Graham, editing the shows and stuff like that. And I really want to put a good product out there so that, you know, people get a good show and they get a good listen, and hopefully they learn something. And my guests are spectacular. They really are. I love every one of them. And like I always tell folks when they ask me about the shows, I say, well, I learn from my guests. I never go onto those shows thinking that I know more than them. That's a mistake, right? So they're good people, and they're very hardworking people, and sometimes, you know, their work is so good that the powers that be like to malign them in some way, but they hang tough.
Yeah, man, we know what you mean. Yeah, we learn a lot from our guests too. We try and do the same thing. Yeah. So yeah, I'll link to your all that stuff in our show notes as well, and we'll send you a copy when we're done there.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah,
it's a lot of fun.
Oh, what's going on there, Danny? I got to take his phone away from him.
My phone.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Mike. Really appreciate it.
Anytime, guys.
Yeah,
anytime.
We'll keep in touch, and have a good night, and enjoy the next America's Next Top President.
You think? I wonder if you think any of them will come clean on their deathbed.
Yeah, who?
Paul.
Oh, Paul.
Oh, Bill Shepard.
Yeah.
Yeah, Bill said he's going to come clean. He said there's more to come. I think he's already come clean. So he says that one of the reasons why he said he wrote the book was because he's very old now. He's pushing 80 years old. And
wow, what?
Yeah, he's 5 years older than biological Paul.
Even Paul being 75 seems old to me.
Yeah. So Shepard's 80 years old, and in the book he states that, look, I don't have a lot of runway left. So, you know, and everybody thinks Paul McCartney wrote these songs. Nobody knows who the hell Bill Shepard is. So, hello.
Yeah, that's going to feel a bit weird.
Yeah, right, exactly.
So he's just going to come out press conference. I'm Bill Shepard.
And nobody will believe him.
Yeah. He's a Russian.
Yeah.
Right on, Mike. Well, thanks for coming on the show.
All right, guys. I really enjoyed it. And thanks. It was a great conversation.
Okay. All right, buddy. Take care.
Right.
Ciao.
Bye-bye now. Bye.
That was our chat with Mike Williams and Mark Allard.
Yeah.
Oh, Mark was tuned in.
Oh, wasn't he, eh? Oh, yeah.
It's too bad he ran out of time.
We should hire him for more shows.
We should hire him on as an intern.
Send in your donations so we can get people to help us out.
Yeah. On point.
Yeah, Mark's pretty, he's pretty switched on. He's pretty intense. He's got a pretty disciplined practice there.
That's a tough one for me.
Yeah. What, the whole Paul McCartney thing or what?
Yeah.
Oh, you were looking at the pictures online.
I'm looking at the pictures right now.
And what, you think that's the same dude?
Maybe. I think he just got into acid.
Got into acid? You think that's what it is? And he shrunk? Or he grew?
I don't know. He got all dopey looking.
Oh my God.
But who knows? I guess we'll find out soon enough. Or maybe the real Paul McCartney will come out.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's something to the whole music industry conspiracy and all that. And I mean, it's a control mechanism.
Yeah, there definitely could be something to do that. Yeah. We'll never know. We'll never know the shit that deep.
And then I'm thinking, what happened in the 80s with all the one-hit wonders? Like, what were they? Were they doing an experiment in the 80s? Just... Anyways, good chatting with another fellow that talks about all the stuff we talk about. I think he probably gets a little deeper into the conspiracies that we've talked about getting into.
We brush on.
That we brush on, yeah.
That was a fun one. It'd be nice to actually talk to this Hugh Harriet.
Yeah.
Find out the scoop. If it's all just bullshit. Let's just get McCartney on.
Sure. Yeah. Get Billy Shears on himself. Yeah.
Maybe if we email the Paul McCartney, maybe if I tweet him, hey, Billy.
Come on the show.
You think he's on Twitter?
Yeah.
I can't turn on my phone. As soon as I turn on my phone, it starts making noise.
Really?
Yeah.
What's going on?
I don't know. Something's playing in the background. Huh. Anyway, check out grimerica.ca/support. There's a ton of different ways to help out the show there.
Show notes. It's all in the show notes.
That's right. Check out the show notes. Graham works hard on the show notes. Yeah, spam Graham. Tell him your stories. Tell him your synchros. All that fun stuff. Sign up for the newsletter. Tell your friends about the show. Thanks for listening, guys. We'll see you next week.